I'd like to talk about putting conflict in the right place. Okay, now this is a very visual thing, so you can push your notes aside if you want, but what I'd like you to do is make sure you have that napkin we gave you, okay? In fact, if you've used your napkin for a napkin, why on earth would you do that? You can use a sheet of paper as well, but I've given you a napkin for a reason, okay? I want you to be able to draw a picture on this, because what I've found is that we often get into trouble the way we deal with conflict because of the way we envision conflict. And I want to adjust your picture of conflict right now in a way that it's going to seem really simple, and it's deceptively simple, because if you unpack this in your life, you're going to find that this principle can revolutionize the way you deal with conflict. It has the power to turn a situation that threatens to turn into just interpersonal bickering into a session, an interaction that looks a lot more like collaborative problem solving. So I think it's useful to draw things on napkins. I tend to do it a lot because I'm always sitting with somebody in a coffee house or something. I can't make my point clear, so I'm drawing on napkins. I thought you needed to know that this is a grand tradition. This is a very famous napkin that you see here. Anybody know what this napkin is? Yeah, this is the birth of Southwest Airlines, literally. I don't know if this is their actual napkin, but it's purported to be, where they were just drawing what would it be like if we had an airline that could connect these three cities in sort of a golden triangle. And obviously this is a big deal napkin. I don't know about you, but I spend most of my flying life on the results downstream of this napkin, right? Another kind of famous napkin is from the Citibank. Citibank was trying to get people to get an organization to come up with a new logo, and it was going to pay over $1 million for this. And while they were describing this to the person over dinner, person was just sketching on a napkin and drew this. While this isn't a good picture of it, this is the literal napkin, and gave them this napkin and said, well, there's your new logo, right? So this is literally the $1 million napkin right here, folks, okay? So I want you to take drawing on this napkin very seriously, all right? So I'd like you to draw a diagram of conflict. If we were to draw a diagram of conflict between two people, this is just a simple thing. Maybe we'd draw something like this. We'd say, okay, we've got a person, there's another person, and conflict happens between them, right? Super sophisticated diagram. Actually, this is a very simple idea, and actually I think we get in trouble because of the simplicity of this, because if this is the way you think of conflict, is there any wonder that it becomes just this head-to-head interpersonal mess? There's nowhere else for it to go, right? So here's what I'd like to do. On your napkin, I want you to draw a different picture. I'd like you to add to this a third element, okay? It's something that I just call the third thing. Because if you add a third thing to this picture, it doesn't just multiply the number of elements in the picture, it's going to fundamentally change the relationship between the first two. Okay, so bear with me here. I think it's probably easier if I give you an example to illustrate this, and it'll start to make sense how we could utilize a third thing. I want to use a situation where maybe you have to go confront somebody who has failed to do something they were supposed to. Let's say there was an expectation or a certain standard that their behavior has not lived up to, and now it's your job to go and talk to them about this. Have you been in that situation? Everybody? Okay? Maybe professional, maybe personal, but you've been in this spot. If I were to diagram that using the third thing here, it would look something like this. First of all, I would make the third thing the standard in this case. Okay? You're going to be person one over there, and person two is over here. That's them. They didn't do what they were supposed to do and live up to the standard. And when you go to confront them about this, conflict arises between you and them. But let me ask you, in the situation that I just described for you, is this the proper place for me to put the conflict in this diagram? No, it's not, is it? Where does it belong? Yeah, it belongs between them and the standard, because remember I said that the problem here was that their behavior didn't conform to the standard. It didn't live up to the standard. The conflict is here. And so you try to tell them that, and much to your surprise, you know what they do? They put it right back here again. And you say, no. Here it was just this problem between of your behavior and the standard. And they say, no, why do you have a personal problem with me? You been in this spot before? This goes on and on and on and on sometimes. So the first thing I want you to take away from this is, how we behave matters, because as much as none of us like interpersonal conflict, for some reason we find it preferable to this. You know, if I can make this a personal problem between the two of us, then I don't have to face my own responsibility quite as much, right? I don't have to really live with that. I can kind of get you involved in this too, but if you're interacting with somebody and they make it a personal problem when you're trying to clarify a point, well, then your conversation goes nowhere, right? I know that sometimes this can happen. I know because I will talk to my son. His job was to get eggs. We have chickens, and his job was to get eggs before school. And then he, came home after school, and the eggs were still in the chicken house. So I went to address this with him, and I said, "Hey, Zach, you know you're supposed to get the eggs before school. That's your chores, and you didn't do it. And I wanted to bring this to your attention." He says, "Why are you mad at me?" And I said, no, you're mistaken this. I'm not mad at you. I'm just pointing out that, you're supposed to get the eggs. You didn't get the eggs and all that. And he says, "Yes, you are. You're always getting mad at me about stuff." I'm like, no, I love you. You're my son. I'm not getting mad at you. I'm just wanting to bring it. And he says, "Yes, you are." You see where this is going? Okay. Now, it only takes, honestly, a few of these times where I decide, yeah, I'm mad at you. Okay. I might lose my temper, I might act differently. Okay, so the reason I'm sharing this with you is, look, the first thing that we need to realize is that people's penchant to make things a personal problem is something we need to be aware of. You can't make it easy for somebody to do that, or it's no use. Your conversation won't go anywhere. And I know that conversation failed because when I finished, Zachary went stomping across the kitchen where my wife was doing something, and she said, "Zachary, what's going on?" And he says, "Nothing. Daddy's just mad at me." Was that the point? No, obviously, if you don't pay attention to this, you might behave in a way that allows somebody to miss the whole point. So the first issue is, let's mind the way you behave, because our goal is to put conflict in the right place. That's what all this is about, is to put conflict in the right place, because, look, I can't tell you that if you put conflict in the right place, everything's going to be perfect. Like the clouds will part, the sun will shine, the birds will sing, there'll be a harmony. I can't promise that, but I can promise that if you don't pause long enough to put conflict in its place, then the rest of your conversation is doomed from the start. You hear me? Because you end up talking about the wrong things, fighting about the wrong things, etc. When I say put it in the right place, I mean literally reposition it, okay? Leah, come up here a minute. Let me use you as an example. And I'm just going to act this out. I know this looks a little bit silly. Please come up here. We've never met before, have we? No, I'm just kidding. Look, when we go into a conflict and it's head-to-head, we square off to each other, figuratively or sometimes literally. Remember the first diagram? And I say, "Look, and we're going to have a conflict like this, because there's only the two of us. This is the only place the conflict can exist." Does that make sense? When I talk about putting it in the right place, look, I know this is going to seem a little silly the way I do this, but watch the way I kind of demonstrate this in my position with Leah. Instead of saying, you didn't get the eggs and you were supposed to get the eggs, what if instead I say, "Well, you're supposed to get the eggs, and I'm just trying to point out that you didn't get the eggs." Do you see how I changed that? Instead of being squared off like this and we're going to fight, there's a third thing that I want to draw attention to. Because when I can draw attention to the third thing and put the conflict in the right place, it changes my relationship with Leah. And now we're considering something else. Not a problem here. Does that make sense? Thank you. Look, that seems silly to demonstrate like that. It seems silly to have you drawing a triangle on a napkin. But look, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to demonstrate this to somebody with various third things. I've said, "Look, here's the third thing." I moved things on my desk. Here's the third thing. Here's you. Here's me. This is the problem. I've drawn it on napkins and Panera. Because the whole point is, if I can get you to understand where the conflict is, then look, a couple really great things happen, okay? First of all, the third thing gets bigger. In this case, it's the standard. And what I mean by that is it starts filling up more of our conversation. That's what we're talking about, is that third thing. And that's what we want, not just some interpersonal bickering. I want to draw attention to that. Look, in this situation, when you're confronting something about that, if you get the conflict in the right place and you start talking about the standard, well, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to become apparent that the standard wasn't clear. And let me ask you, is that productive? Yeah, that's productive. It's not very comfortable to find that out right now when you're trying to tell them they haven't done something, right? But it's good to know because now you realize, okay, I need to clarify the standard. I know you're thinking, well, I'm going to be right back in this conversation again in a week. Yeah, but it'll be different because the standard will be clear, right? The second thing that might happen when you get conflict in the right place is maybe they come to the conclusion that there really is a conflict between their behavior and the standard. Is that productive? Yeah, that's great. That's what you're looking for, right? And that happens only when you can get the conflict in the right place because, this doesn't happen all the time. I mean, honestly, sometimes it looks like this. Instead of our triangle, this is what happens when it gets personal, okay? People don't think of it as a triangle. They haven't had me telling them to draw things on napkins. So they think of it this way. And person one is championing the standard, right? And they're going to march in and clarify this. And when they do that, there's some conflict that erupts. I mean, this looks familiar, right? But then look, when the pushback comes, if this is the way you think of it, look, person one gets bigger, right? You can tell because their pronouns change. They start saying, well, I told you, and why didn't you do what I said? Right? And when that happens, look, any effort to put the conflict in the right place fails because there is one giant impediment. What is it? You. Yeah, you, right? You're sucking up all the oxygen all the time and distracting entirely from the point that needs to be made. They can't even see the third thing past you. Does that make sense? So let's go back to our diagram here where it was working, okay? We've got conflict in the right place. The standard, whatever the third thing is, has gotten bigger. I want to draw your attention to one other thing. You got a lot smaller. Does that bother any of you? I mean, after all, you were having to go confront this person. Aren't you supposed to be big and burly? Now, let me suggest that while you're smaller in the grand scope of this is not a situation where you lack influence. Because look, let me ask you, when you look at this, where's the power coming from in this system? The standard, right? The third thing. That's the prominent thing. That's where the power is. And so it's not your positional authority and who you are that matters. It's the strength of the third thing that you're calling attention to. Here's why you want to know that. That means that you can use this idea, this model, to deal with conflict with somebody when you're not over them. You're not the boss of them in sort of 8-year-old terms, right? This helps you when you have to work laterally with somebody. Sometimes you've been in positions before where you're not an authority over somebody, but you need to hold them accountable because you're on a team together and they haven't been doing what they were supposed to do in the team and that sort of thing. Well, that's fine because your authority here doesn't come from your position. It comes from the third thing, the standard that you can point at. This is really an influential spot to be in. And I'll use that as just a segue to mention this third line that I haven't talked a lot about here. It sort of explains something that you've experienced but you haven't known before. One of the things that really bugs me is how much we will put up with from our leaders and still follow them. I mean, think about the leaders in our nation, our society, organizations, et cetera. I mean, they can do really dumb things. They can make big mistakes. They can even have huge moral failures and still people will follow them, right? But there is one thing that if it becomes apparent will make a leader's influence disappear immediately, just evaporate. You know what that is? It's hypocrisy. Think about it. I mean, if you at some point decide that your leader or your supervisor or someone like that is a poser and they don't really stand for the things that they're holding you accountable for and stuff, I mean, there is no faster way for them to lose influence and authority because immediately you'll say, well, I'm out of here. I can't follow that. In that situation, that's because this line is severed. Right? They're not accountable to the third thing. And the power of the third thing comes when I want to confront you or talk to you about a conflict, but I'm going to call your attention to a third thing that has authority over both of us, that's important to both of us, because then I can be firm, I can be strong and everything else, because this isn't a problem between us. It's all about that third thing. Does that make sense? It's like a judo that shifts the conflict from interpersonal to purposeful. Now, in an effort to kind of connect the dots here, I want you to think about some third things in your life. Maybe you have a difficult conversation ahead of you, And you're already thinking, man, this conversation is doomed if I can't think of a third thing. You want to think of some third things that might come up that you can call attention to. If there are written documents or agreements or values or those sorts of things in professional contexts, those are always third things just waiting to be used, because you can say, hey, together we value this, and I want to talk to you about the fact that you don't seem to be acting that out. Right? Sometimes it's not something that's written down. Sometimes it might be something that you call somebody's attention to otherwise. Here's an example from my own life. See if you can hear the third thing. I was talking to my daughter once when she was younger, and she had not done something that she had planned to do and some of her friends expected her to do. And I wanted to talk to her about the importance of following through, because that's what integrity is all about. And you can appreciate that that's a hard conversation to have with your young daughter. It might not go well, right? So I tried to approach it not as a confrontation between the two of us, but by using a third thing. See if you can hear it here. I said, Maddie, I know that you want to be the kind of girl that everybody counts on, the one that all your friends are just sure and certain about. And I just wanted to let you know that if you do that kind of thing, it can dent that and cause them to think differently about it. Did you hear the third thing? What was it? Yeah, it was her reputation. It wasn't what I thought, what her mother thought, what you're supposed to be. I said, look, I know you want to be this. So rather than confronting her and saying, you haven't done what you're supposed to do, this family is all about integrity, young lady, I didn't do that. I said, look, I know that you want to be this, and so I just want you to know that this is the sort of thing that could dent that. Now I'm in it with her, right? Oddly enough, in that situation, we had a great discussion about integrity, and it was a really good moment. I can't say that every situation has been a victory like that, but do you see the difference in the tone and direction of that conversation? Good food for thought? So here's what I'd like you to do as we're just finishing up here. I want you to think about the third thing, okay? It's a silly name. It's so simple, right? The third thing. That's because I don't know what else to call it. Anything can be the third thing, as long as it's something that you want to call attention to that allows you to put the conflict in the right place. It will transform your interaction because it enables you to do this judo that turns a potentially difficult or demeaning interpersonal conflict into something that looks like collaborative problem solving as we wrestle with the third thing together.